Alright, so before I get started on the build, I do just want to go over what these three little bottles are and where you're going to be using them. So this first one here marked screw, this is a thread locker. It's kind of a bluish green liquid. You're going to be using this on anytime you're going to be screwing into a metal part. So you're going to put a little coating on these threads before you screw it in. And that just helps keep everything nice and tight, because over time, due to vibrations and just normal flight, things can loosen up. And that just, like I said, helps prevent that from happening. So that's the thread locker. Now, I actually like to use Loctite brand thread locker. It's blue, the removable kind. You don't want to use red thread locker. That's permanent. That's the last thing you want to use. But you can use this stuff. You know, like I said, it comes with a kit. Works fine. So this next bottle here, grease. Now the grease is what you're going to be using on the thrust bearings, the feathering shaft, and a couple other locations that need to be lubricated. That's where this is going to come in handy. Now this next one marked bearing. This is not grease. Okay, what this is used for, this is an adhesive, because sometimes like this style bearing here, sometimes you want to glue that into the part that it's used in. So that's where you would use this. You'd put a very, very light coating on the outside of the bearing and then put it into the part and it'll glue it in place. You do not use that for lubrication, because again, this is an adhesive. This is not for lubrication. So don't mix this up with this, because that will ruin your day. But I just wanted to, real quickly, like I said, just tell you what those are for and where you're going to be using them. Alright, so starting off with the rotor head. Now, the rotor head on the flybarless helicopters, it's very simple and straightforward. As you can see, this is all there is. That's what's just really nice about them. So, when you start off, you're going to want to go ahead and take the blade grips off, so that way you can grease the thrust bearings. And you also want to put just a light coating of grease on the feathering shaft there. And I've already done this side here, and then I just wanted to make sure that you know about these washers for the thrust bearings. They are different. The bottom one, if you put it on, it should move a lot, and the top one doesn't. It should have a nice tight fit. So just make sure that you know that there's a difference between these two washers, and the one with the loose fit goes on the bottom. When you grease the bearing here, what I like to do is just take it and put a little drop of grease, kind of like in between every other little ball bearing. Because if you put too much grease on it, any excess grease is going to fly out of the blade grip once you get it up to speed. So I just put, usually, like I said, a little drop every other bearing there, and it'll soak in. So then you want to just stack this onto the lower bearing plate there, or washer, and make sure you put the close side down. That, and then you stack this top one on it, and then go ahead and get all that stacked inside the blade grip here. And I always just stick it on like a screwdriver, that way, oops, I can just slide it down in here, and I got everything stacked down in place. Now, as I said, you also want to put a light coat of grease on the feathering shaft here. Get that put back on, put down in place. And then you got just the screw here. Make sure you put a light coat of thread locker on this screw before you screw it down in place. And I'll do that here in a second. And while you're going through with the thread locker, you can go ahead and put a little thread locker on this, get that screwed into place, and then with the swash plate here, you want to take all these links off and just apply thread locker. Most of them come with thread locker on them. Actually, all of mine did, but I like to remove them and apply thread locker myself, just to make sure I know that they've been correctly locked down. Same thing with these bolts. All these little bolts, I took these out and applied thread locker to them. Now, I didn't apply thread locker to this one just yet, because this one is used to clamp this down onto the main shaft after you get everything mounted. So you want to wait till you're ready to slide this down onto the main shaft before you apply thread locker to that one and get that one tightened down. So I'm just going to get this tightened down real quick, and then I'll get this stuff on. Alright, so you can see I've got the whole head assembled. And the reason I did this is because I just wanted to show you what this looks like after it's all assembled. But I'm not actually going to be using this head on this helicopter. I'm actually going to be using the Black Widow flybarless head. So, but I just wanted to talk about this one here real quickly. So what I did was I went ahead and I applied thread locker to all my threads. You know, anytime I had a metal screw going into a metal part, I went through all these screws down here, as well as the ball links on the swash plate. Now, the links that come down from the blade grips, the ball links where these connect, they have to be changed out with the 700 size links, because otherwise this linkage won't fit properly. So don't forget to do that, because otherwise you're just asking for trouble. But again, I just went through and I applied thread locker to all the ball links and such like that. Now, when you tighten the screw down here, this one, to tighten down this washout assembly, be very careful you don't over tighten it, because if you over tighten it, what that will actually do is it pulls this arm right here out of alignment, and it won't connect to the swash plate properly. So like I said, just be careful that you don't over tighten it. The best thing to do is to tighten it down and then connect the arm, because that way you'll tell if you've over tightened it. And it doesn't have to be very, very tight, you know, to not move. These links coming down, one other thing about these, when you make these up, you are going to want to use a link wrench, but these are a little bit bigger than the 600, 500 size links. So if you use like a standard size link wrench, you may end up having to bend the tip of it apart just a little bit to get it to fit down over that. So, but like I said, that was just a couple things I wanted to mention about this. But as I said, I'm going to be using, on this one, this is going to be using the Black Widow flybarless head. And you can see here, it's a little bit cleaner design, a little bit simpler. Well, actually a lot simpler. Just makes life easier. And this is available from scaleflying.com, RC Aerodyne there. So you can find this on the site. I didn't put the head button on just yet, because when I go through to set this up later, I'm going to need to be putting my pitch gauge tool here right up here on the top. So until then, I will kind of leave this off to the side. But as you can tell here, I've just got this all settled here. Now I did the same thing. I checked the blade grips. These already had grease in them, so I didn't have to apply grease to them. But I did check. I checked all the screws in the head, make sure they all had thread locker on them. Most of them did. There's only, I think, 2 that didn't. And again, same thing with these ball links here. Where these connect, you need to make sure that you change those out with the 700 size links, ball links there, because these size, the 600 size links, won't work for this. You'll have a lot of play, and that'll just end up resulting in a crash if you try to fly with those wrong links on there. So, alright, so now I'm going to move on to the frame. Alright, so moving on to the frame. Now, assembling the frame is pretty easy. Basically what you do, the easiest way, is just to assemble everything onto one half the frame, and then go ahead and put the other half on and just tighten the screws down. Now, a couple things about this before you get ahead in assembling it. One of the things that you might want to do is take some sandpaper, just some fine sandpaper, go through and sand the edges down a little bit. It's not that they're very rough, but they could be smoother. So sanding them down is just kind of a little bit nicer for working on the helicopter, because you don't have the rough edges. But also, if you have any wires that may be running over the top of, or near some of these edges, you don't want to have a rough edge that could cut into the wire. And then another thing about, before you go ahead and assemble this, it's a good idea just to take your screws and go through and check the screw holes that you're going to be screwing them down through, to make sure that the screws go through the holes nice and easy. You don't want to be fighting to get through the screw through the frame panel before screwing it into whatever part that you're trying to fasten, because that's just going to be a pain in the butt. So if you have any screw holes that you feel that you want to enlarge, it's a good idea to go ahead and do that before you get it assembled. Now you can see here I've got, like I said, half the panel, half the frame assembled here. In the little screw package here, you get these screws that are meant for the plastic pieces, and you get all the washers, and then you get the 2 long screws. These 2 long screws here are used for the back part when you attach the tail boom supports, and then all the other ones, the short ones, are used everywhere else. Also here with the bearing blocks, the 3 bearing blocks, the bottom one is, the bearing is just a little bit smaller than the top 2. And that's because if you look at the rotor head here, this bottom section is smaller. So make sure you put the bearing block with the smaller bearing on the bottom, and that's really easy to tell if you, as soon as you put the main shaft through the bearing. If it's got a lot of play, then you know it's one of the upper bearings. Also, the screws and the washers for the bearing blocks come already attached, or screwed into the bearing blocks, so that way you know where they are. And I also did go through and remove the screws for these little retainer plates, and applied my own thread locker to them, just to make sure. And then you can see here I've got the motor plate, and the motor plate, a little package that comes with, you got the screws. The screws are screwed into the motor plate, but there's no washers, so you can use some of the washers out of this package, so that way you get the nice, uniform look of all the washers on there. And then you got your little brace up here. So, but now, one of the things about once you get this all together, now for myself, I'm just going to be assembling the kit just, for the purposes of the video, and then I'll be going back through and adding the electronics. And when I do that, I'll be taking a lot of these screws back out. So I'm not applying thread locker to any of these just yet. But if you are building this to get ready to fly it, and the best thing to do is to just still, with all these screws right here, just go ahead and dry fit them without any thread locker until you get the whole frame assembled. And then what you want to do is you take the main shaft and you slide it down through all the bearings and make sure it's nice and smooth. Then go through, take the screws out, apply thread locker, put them back in, and tighten them up nice and tight. And that way the bearing blocks are all perfectly aligned for the main shaft. So I'm going to go ahead and get the other side panel put back on here and keep moving forwards. Alright, so moving on to the control linkage here for the elevator. So to start off, what you want to do is go through and remove all these little ball links on here and apply thread locker to all of them, along with these screws, just to make sure that they are, do in fact have thread locker on them and assembled properly. So now, then what you want to do is take your shaft here, take the screws off of it, and start to slide it through the frame and get this positioned inside the frame. And on this shaft, there's a little recess here where this set screw is going to be tightening down on. Just take the shaft, start going through, get through this little control link here, and just keep going through. And like I said, a little recess right here, and that's where the little grub screw on the control link here is going to tighten up on. Alright, so now I can go ahead and get these little arms positioned on. Now underneath, before you put these arms on, you got to use one of these washers. Now there's 4 washers. I've already got one of them on the other side here. But 2 of them are a little bit thicker than the other 2. And what it is after you get everything all positioned on and tightened down, it should move nice and smooth. And if you have excess play, then you might want to try the thicker washers. But if you tighten everything down and it's really, really tight, then you're going to want to use the thinner washers. Now for myself, I find that the thinner washers are best. So what I can do is go ahead and position a little washer on there, put the arm on, and get this screw and this washer on. And don't forget to apply thread locker to that. But after I tighten that down, everything's nice and smooth, but I don't have any excess play in there. But when I tried to use the thicker ones, when I tightened everything down, this was too tight and they didn't move freely. So, but I'm just going to go ahead and get some thread locker on that, apply that on, and then I'm going to go ahead and get the skids bolted on. And that's very simple, straightforward. You get the skid horses and the screws for them and the little washers. Make sure you use the washers on the little nuts, and the skids, or I'm sorry, the little nuts there fit into little slots on this bottom base plate here. So you're going to want to mount your skids first, then go ahead and slide the pipe through. That's what I do. But I'm going to do that and then I'll come back.